Hey, so I wanted to show my Blender setup. I'm by no means a Blender expert. This is actually my first time running through Blender, so that's the reason why I didn't screen record that process, and I just figured I'd come back and talk it through after the fact, because I was really just kind of all over the place, learning myself, Googling things. And that's kind of the main way that I approach this, is just by using the knowledge that I already had about rendering and just Googling for the things that I was trying to do. This is the concept again over here. This is kind of the main setup I use. This is mostly the shading setup, where I just turned on the real-time rendering, viewport shading, and I'm using Eevee as my renderer here. And yeah, so the main thing is I followed this tutorial to try to capture the hair look by Lightning Boy Studio, and this is a really great one. Obviously it's both Arcane, so it's very much relevant to what I was trying to accomplish. And then the other thing that I used was the Stylized Shader 3 by this person, Dragon X. Just found this Googling around and played that video, and I saw some cool results, and I thought maybe I could use that. The NPR shading, if you're building something from scratch, is really deep, and I wasn't really interested in tackling all of that. I just wanted to get in here and make this as fast as I could. So I was just leveraging, I bought this shader for $40, I think it was, and I was leveraging that what they built there. After doing a lot of experimentation, I found that the shader itself wasn't really doing exactly what I wanted. But one of the beauties of working in Blender, I found, was that you can just use a mixed shader. So you can use the traditional BSDF shader, and then you can mix it with this comic shader that I got from this person, Stylized Shader 3. And I'll show you that exactly. So you can see this is just rendering real time. I did actually send off renders for this when I composited it. I'm going to go through that too. But I set up the renderer so that it's one-to-one for the most part with what you see here. And the only difference is that I scale it up and like the depth of field. With these lights on here, one of the things I noticed, like in the concept, you can't really see reflections, but reflections are such a big part of hair and like the look of hair. So that's kind of a bummer. I couldn't really figure out a way to capture some reflections in there without really blowing out the light on the face. I do have this light though that I just named hair light, that you can see, and if I turn it on and I look at it from a different angle, you can see those reflections happening in kind of a stylized way, which I think is really cool. And so I did try to incorporate some of that later on with a little compositing. But I also share some other angles where you can see it popping in real nice, like this over here, in terms of like just the way that I do the presentation. So I'll turn this light off here. If I hit 0, it's going to take me from this sort of temporary camera to the render camera. You can see that. So that's the exact render camera. You can assign other cameras. So this right here, this means that this camera main is the one that's selected, this icon. I searched all over the internet, nobody mentions this, but it's really important because it's really hard to tell what your camera is without having some sort of information, and this is pretty subtle. The other thing is, if I needed to switch cameras, click here, I believe it's Control 0. Yeah, so that flips to the other camera. I can go back, Control 0, and if I hit 0, then I can take it myself out of the camera entirely, into this like standard working mode. Again, kind of difficult to tell which mode you're in. These are the results. Talking about the shader, so I mostly worked this way, where I had this into the shading mode, turning on the real-time rendering, so that way I could have the shader open at the same time. If I click on this over here, whatever I click on, it's going to select the material that is assigned to that. So this is the head material. When I select the head, if I select the mask, you see it's the mask material over here. Really, these are like just copied materials with like adjusted settings, mostly the same settings, because I as you saw it previously, I did this in Substance Painter. So the textures are pretty much just like, if you hit Alt R, it will reload the texture. So if you export from Substance Painter and you want to reload your textures, you hit Alt R and that'll do that for you. So pretty much my process was just like streamlined that way, without like too much special manipulation in the shader itself, just keeping it pretty standard from one object to the next. So it's texture driven. The special thing here is I'm mixing the Stylized Shader 3 with the Principled BSDF. The reason why I'm doing that is because there's certain things in this Principled BSDF that the comic shader did not have. And so the main thing is how the normal maps work. I definitely need the normal maps, and I'm not sure, is it in there? I don't think it is. So that's pretty important. So I just leverage what I need from here, and then I leverage what I need from there. You can see that there's like some like interesting like cross hatching that is in the comic shader that I manipulated and adjusted. Let me go back to the face to see maybe if I can adjust one of these things. You can see how it works. So let's just play with one of these settings, like shadow. See how the shadow is like sort of growing and shrinking, and it's very like cut out looking. So that's pretty cool. Like again, it's not super easy to author these from scratch, but I was able to just purchase this, and so play with the highlight. If you got this, you could play around with it. There's all kinds of ones that you could use. So this really is just like, I'm feeding this, the reason why this is connected, I'm feeding the diffuse from here that's used in the Principled BSDF. I'm using the same texture here. And then besides that, I'm just manipulating different dials and switches they have there. And then it's mixing in the Principled BSDF with this comic shader, mixing it into this mix shader, which has to get converted to the shader RGB. And then I'm actually like using this multiply because what I'm doing is I'm actually multiplying this one over here, this outline. I think that's the reason why I was like sort of struggling to show you the outline is what I was manipulating with something else. So I'm just remembering this now, but this is like, this was actually like where I just like grabbed the, that's this dark line back here. So the thing I was manipulating was something different. If I change this, see, there we go. So that's like the black outline. And so the reason why I did that was simply just because I wanted to isolate that. Like there's certain behavior in this comic shader that I wanted to isolate so that I can manipulate that on its own and like make it like its own thing. So you can see I just kind of like split up a couple of these. So you can use like multiple versions of the same shader if you're just mixing it in like I am here. And the main reason why I was copying this shader over to the other shaders, just selecting it, Control-C, Control-V in the other shader, was these kinds of like cross-hatching and stuff, like how big that is and where it is. Again, just a slider that I can control. I wanted that to be consistent with other materials, so you have it like the same behavior working over here. In terms of like the rendering, I guess there's like one little render thing. It's not really like a secret. It's well-known knowledge, but again, this is all new to me. If I hit render here, F12, you'll see the render that came out. Again, like pretty one-to-one with what I showed you back there. I actually just realized that I have a rim light that I had on the other side. What I'll do is I'll just Alt-Tab to the other screen. And I'll show you, I'll just turn that on. So this rim rather, yeah, so this is just because I had another angle I was rendering. So I prefer the rim on this side. And then if I hit 0, you can see from the exact perspective that I was using in that. So that render that I just did, there's an interesting thing that you can do when you're compositing later on. So the rendering itself, there's somewhere in here, I think it's this image. This lets me, this little image looking thing, this lets me actually select different options in terms of like the passes that are rendered. So I can have these different things. One of the big ones, I mean, there's obviously shadow and ambient. Mist is like a kind of a unique thing, I think, for Blender. It's sort of like a depth pass that's pretty interesting and useful. I have bloom on, of course, for effects. That's pretty subtle. And then in terms of like my camera, I mentioned I have the depth of field. If I go to the camera, I guess the interesting thing there is I found that you need to figure out a way to make it focus where you want. And so you can create an empty object. I think you just hit Shift A and create an empty. And then once you create the empty, then you can select the empty. And now when you move that empty, that's where the camera is focusing. So there we go. So if I move this around, it's just gonna focus on whatever that's on when I'm in that camera. So going back to the camera, it's changing where the focus is. Might be hard to tell. But yeah, so this is precisely why I didn't want to record this when I was doing it, because I'm like as you can see, I'm pretty new to it. But I guess that's kind of a cool thing, because you can see that you can get up and running pretty quickly with this if you just are patient and you're Googling for stuff. There's lots of information out there, and hopefully this is just like the stuff I'm showing here gives you some ideas of like ways to look for this. For more information. So yeah, so that's kind of the way that I approach that. Normal cameras, importing the model into Blender. I'm sort of used to Marmoset, where I have like a streamlined auto updating mesh. So if I made a change in Zbrush and then I re-export it, it just auto updates in because it's linked in Marmoset. Well, they don't have that as far as I can tell in Blender, which is a bummer. So if I made a change with my mesh, I'd have to select the mesh and then delete it and then hit re-import. I guess the main saving grace is that you can import multiple FBXs at the same time, but the downside is you still have to like go through and assign the material to the objects one by one as needed. So that's that. I'm not super happy about that part, but it's kind of a minor thing considering how cool the rendering is and how robust the shading is. I mean, you really have no control over the shader in Marmoset. You just have to use what they got there for you, and you can literally make anything here in Blender, and super stylized stuff that you wouldn't be able to make in Marmoset as well. There's a couple more things that I wanted to note here, and one of them is that the way that I approach the rendering is to use this HDRI map, and then I turn the strength pretty far down so that I just have like some reflections from it and slight ambient, and then most of the lighting is controlled by the standard type lights, mostly a 3-point lighting setup that you normally see. So since I did that, I needed to turn off scene world because it was making it darker. And then I found that when I went to render, it would render with scene world on by default. So then I had to actually change the settings for scene world. So the way that I was able to do that, I found, was with these settings here. First, what you need to do to access this is go to the shader editor and then change this from object. If you had an object selected, like so, it should show up somewhere in here. There it is. So this is the skin. If I go to world, then that's where you find the general world settings. And so simply, I made sure that I used the same forced HDRI. You can Google where that's located on your machine. So if I looked back in here, it's the forced HDRI that I'm using. There's also a strength on here, 1.154, in order to get the renderer for scene to be the same as matching in the viewport. I had to set that strength to the same thing, 0.154 right here. So just literally just copying what you see me plug in here. It's important that you change this to texture. Load up your HDRI. The default is this linear rec, which is correct. And then hooking these up here, this forces the background color to be like you see here. And then this mix shader, this just allows, so this background shader, this is the background instead of the HDRI map that you would see. And then this mix shader just mixes that to make that happen. That's how that works. Frankly, I don't know a lot about creating this from scratch. It's something that I found as a setup I actually mixed a couple of recommendations together for this effect. And then one final note I forgot to mention was the shader that I used. If I press N on the key, it brings this menu up. And once I installed that special shader, that Stylized Shader 3, this extra tab is here. And then you can see the comic one, this one with this like sort of edge hatching, is the one that I used. So if I just click on an object and click assign, it's going to just assign this to it. And then once you have it in here in your shader, you can always just copy and paste it around. So that's how I populated all the shaders, by copying all the same settings over and then just plugging in my texture maps accordingly to what I needed. And yeah, and then you can just see that these are sort of categorized into different groups. So if I click on the stylized and I click here, you can see there's several stylized types. These comic types. Some of these are more or less useful depending on what you're trying to do. Base, this is like for the grounds. Simple, real basic ones that you could leverage. It's how the hair was made. There's this particle edit mode here. So I can switch to my different modes with, I think it's tab, particle edit mode. And that's where you can see these particles. And then I've got a move brush, and you can see I'm literally able to just like move it around. I hit in, this is like kind of a key thing that's not really mentioned in that video for the hair that I mentioned to watch. You can show this while you're editing. You can show the hair while you're editing it by clicking this off and on. So you hit N to get the tool and turn this off and on. Okay, I just actually paused the video because I was on that like circle select thing, and I guess there's like a hotkey for it, which is W, turns out. Like, because Blender is so hotkey based, like it's, once you get to know it, I'm sure it's like really fantastic, but if you're new to it, it's going to be super frustrating because you'll hit a button and then things just will change. It's also context sensitive depending on what UI you're in. That also has an effect on it. Film, there we go. If you hit transparent, that's the way you get a transparent background when you're rendering. That was super important. And if I go into over here is the particle system, and that's where all these settings are. Another thing that I found that was like really helpful, I can actually click show emitter on here. Let's see. So show emitter in the renderer, that's actually not what I'm interested in. There's a display, show renderer. So that's what I wanted to show. Plane, and on the plane I just hit the add button and I clicked and added these different splines. It gets interpolated between the splines, similar to how XGen works, if you're familiar with that. And then I just use the comb brush. I noticed in the tutorial as well that the author there was using a move brush, or just a translate and rotate tool. for the life of me, I can't figure out how to do it. I think that maybe you can no longer do it that way, and maybe that's why. But if I have something selected, then I can move that, and it won't let me select other things. So whichever things you want selected, you can do that, and then you can just move them. A real handy thing, if you got like multiple splines like this, you can go to select and then say something like select the whole thing. Select linked. There we go. Yeah, so that's kind of a common situation. Like you just want to mess with this one spline, and then you can move that. In the tutorial, again, they didn't use multiple splines. It was just like one piece. But what I found is that I really needed to use multiple splines in this case because of the way the hairstyle is. So this did feel a lot like XGen when I was doing that, and so I was a little familiar with that already and how the behavior would work. I did notice that like if I created one spline, the hair started to follow. I think most of the time when I was working with this, like I just showed you there, I would actually switch over to the modeling view, and then I would like move it around and then come back. So that's just that's what I found was the best way. Some of this is actually not rendering at the moment. Properties, maybe it's like deselected now. Object mode, there we go. Just had to switch to object mode. Oh cool, so now you can see the spline that I had. I might have turned this off, so this hides all those kinds of things, so that might be why we didn't see it previously. But you can see what the hair looks like over here. I'm glad I switched over to this mode so you can see that. And generally I was like working in here, so I go over to the particle edit mode, and then I could go ahead and select what I wanted to work on, and then I could just like go ahead and move this stuff as needed. I guess like one last piece of information I want to share about this was there's like different clumping and things that they cover a little bit. That's pretty important. This roughness is also important in terms of like the behavior. You can play with that and figure that out. And there's tutorials also on just like general hair. So those can help you out. And the one little secret thing I found was I was trying to play with like the way the ends behave, how they split, and that's under this timing. Yeah, so that's kind of it as far as the setup here. Go to back to shading. Next, I'll just share the rendering. Oh, I guess the final point that I wanted to mention was when I did that render, that brings up another option. So I'm gonna alt tab back to the renderer. In the renderer, you have render results, and then you have like all these different things. One is this viewer node, which is like really important. You can also see composite there. It's gonna be the whole composite, and then you can switch between these different things. So what I'll show you is actually like in this image tab. And so I'm going to switch this one from shading to image editor. So what I've done here is I've hit Control Alt on this here. So what we've got is the compositor open. So I made this, when you so you come in here first, you're going to see nothing and wonder what the hell is going on here. How do I use this? You have to turn use nodes on, so it's not super obvious if you're new. So I figured that one out, and then I found that if I was watching a tutorial about how to do the rest of these things. You can use this Cryptomatte legacy here, and if you alt click on it, what it does is it switches the connections. So alt left mouse button. And so with this image viewer and viewer node, it's taking the render that we had, that you can see here, and then it's giving me access to this Cryptomatte. Again, new to me, but super cool, and I'll show you why. This is so handy when you're compositing. I love it. So if I hit the plus button here, so I just deleted what was in there, I double clicked, selected it all, press delete. If I hit the plus button, you can see if I were to just select the face, it's going to be all of the materials for this part, and I can show you by doing this. I think that's kind of frozen at the moment. Hold on. There we go. So you can see it's just selecting that. So now I have this really handy alpha for that area if I wanted to mess with compositing on just the skin. And then I can go to image, and then I can say copy, and then it's just in the clipboard. So if I have Photoshop open, I can just hit paste. I don't even really have to save this as an image. I can just paste it right in my Photoshop as a mask, and that is super fast and super handy. It looks like when you see this thing that maybe there isn't as many options as there is in reality, because the colors can be very same. Like an example is there's this this tier line here that you can see on the side, which is pretty much looks like it's black, but then the eye over here is also like the same color, what it looks like at least. If I were to go ahead and delete this and then I make a new selection, you can see that I can't actually just isolate that. So you can't necessarily see the color changes. They might be so close that you can't tell, but it exists. And so you can see, like, as I switch this, you can see it's just that eye now. It is not that other part, which is the tier line. It's just that. So this method I'm super impressed with for compositing, and it's actually something that I'm pretty excited about using in the future, which sort of like is a good segue to the next part that I wanted to share with you all, which is how did I actually composite this. So I'm gonna just open up Photoshop to show you that, and there it is. So this is the raw render. I put a background behind there, so I'll just turn that off. So again, when I went to that film setting, I could make it a transparent background, but I also render without it on, so then I have a gray background as well, if that's useful in some ways. And of course, you can do all the composite passes that you would expect with this. So I might be able to access it here, but maybe not. That might just be in the render, the actual like render itself. So again, bear with me. I'm not super familiar with this yet. This composite, if I go to maybe view layer, there we go. That's it. So now you can see that I can select any of these, like AO, and now I got the AO, and then just like before, but in this renderer, I can copy it and paste it, or I can save these images if I need them for later. Again, like super handy. This is this mist one that's really cool. I told you it's kind of like a depth pass. So yeah, that's kind of like the way that I go about rendering. It's actually like once you get past the hurdles of how to just navigate and like how these things work, once you know how they work, it's actually like not so hard at all. It's like really great tools there. This is the raw render. I made this background. I didn't have like a decent background, but I did have the inspiration from the concept. So let me just pull that up. There we go. And let's see. So that's the target really. Again, not trying to make an exact replica, just using it as inspiration. This is the background there. So I just kind of wanted something similar feeling, since I wasn't gonna try to just like select this and make something of it. Seemed like it wouldn't work as well. So I did find some images of similar colored type things from the show, and I just really blurred it up, and then I started playing with other like combinations of that. So in here, this background 01, you can see that I was playing a bit with different ways of blurring. This is a motion blur. And then this background 2 is when I started mixing other elements of backgrounds in there. This one's like another background, another image from the, it's actually not a background, it's just an image from the show that I just really stretched and warped. Yeah, so that's kind of the background, and then this is the raw render. And so in the raw render, there is, I edited the mask color, you can see in this phase, right? And so then added the AO, and there's a multiply, did a levels adjustment. This is the mist pass. I didn't actually use that, but I had it there in case it was helpful to me. Just darkened the lower part there, adjusting the hair slightly. This is just an alpha for me to select the model if I need to work on that with masks. Another edit to the mask color, some painting, cleanup stuff, pretty minor, adding a little shadow for the eyes. Some of the stuff, I mean, you can render it that way potentially, but then at a certain point, it's like you're fighting it so much to do that. I wonder, is it worth it? I don't want it to be like totally smoke and mirrors though. Like none of this is the model. So I was trying not to do that, but then again, this being my first time working in Blender, I didn't want to get hung up too much on the details, and I just want to get the process down and then share that process with you all, to do that as quickly as possible. And then in the future, I'll probably figure out ways to like hone in a little bit more, like once I get more experience working with the hair, trying to like get this to sort of be a little thinner towards the bottom rather than like really messing with it too much. I ended up just painting it that way, and later on you'll see. This is editing. This is like some green coloring that I added, some leveling. I try to like name these and organize these reasonably well. So I just named this setup render for, that's like the initial render passes, mixing those things together. This is just a little folder for like crop selections. It's actually nothing else than that. If I want to save off images, I have like the exact sizes that I could reuse. This is a cutout light. If I zoom way in, you can see it's like kind of subtle the way that this is. This is set to an overlay at 80%. And then I leveled it so that, and added some hue and saturation to like get it dialed in. You can see that like this is like sort of creating like a little bit of a harsher edge here. If I go to the top here, say Control A, Control C, Control V, that's gonna just copy a flattened image. If I go to filter and then I go to filter gallery, I'll pull that, it opens on another screen. I'll pull that over so you can see. There's obviously all these filters, people are familiar with these. I tend to use cutout a lot, like this. So that's actually something very similar from here. And then I can just level it and overlay it and get it exactly how I want. So this just lets me sort of flatten the image a little bit, slightly. Very, very subtle stuff, creating a little bit of that banding. And then I can choose to mask it in, mask it out how I want when I overlay it. So it's very, very subtle, just something that I noticed, like maybe this doesn't even do it as much, but to me it's creating some of those like hard edges. If I sort of missed some of it in the painting section. Very subtle stuff. Like I really want this to be super close anyway, and then this is just for compositing for a beauty render to try to make it as good as I can, just for like as a presentation type piece. But then I always go ahead and share images of it unedited as well, so you can see what the model without any smoke and mirrors looks like. Again, always trying to keep that to a minimum so it doesn't turn into just a 2D thing. So reducing some contrast in here. This is adjusting the eye color. Oh, I see. I have this flattened version over here still. So reducing contrast so it feels more gray. See that? this feels kind of gray. You can see it's starting to do similar things when I do that. And then this one here is an eye color adjustment. So I noticed the eyes are like super bright, like probably like not how they would be brightness wise in a real render. They probably edited that as well. So I'm just doing the same thing. Fixing eye, this is like some subtle paint there. You can't even see it, I'm sure. Fix the jacket color, just changing this actually with like some of these passes that I did, it sort of lost some of that color. It doesn't feel very green. So I just like added that back in. And then this is like my first pass of the render there. For the most part, the same thing. And then this second pass here, if I turn that on, what you'll see is this is where I sort of like flattened things and then started to edit them in a more destructive way. That was all non-destructive previously. So then because I flattened it, but I still wanted the transparency, I just selected this guy as transparent. And then I added the background in behind it again so that I could still have that transparent. But one of the main things that you might notice is between these two is the hair, right? I did a little bit of a liquefy on the hair to get it more of that similar shape as to what you see here. And then I just did some like very subtle painting of a few little extra strands. There were some pretty cool strands that I got anyways, which you can see in some other angles better. Like this is like a raw render, like unedited. So again, very much like following that tutorial that I mentioned previously to get this like shader to work that way. The thing that I really like about it is it's doing some of this like translucency stuff behind it, which I think makes it feel pretty realistic, but then it's like rendered stylistically. So, and you can see those reflections from this side better. So there are some stray hairs. This is literally just how the model was. That's how the model was over there. So you can see that like in this view here, can I zoom in? There we go. Yes, so there's those same strands happening. So that's not just like painted in. That's how the hair was designed with the particle effect mentioned previously. So yeah, so I probably could have gotten more of that in there manually, but I felt like I took it far enough that I'll just like add a couple little paint strokes in there and then just taper it myself. Fixing the ear. Let's see, did I flatten this again? Yeah, okay. So I just, it's actually on this side, super subtle stuff, honestly. Like I can't even find it sometimes. If I can't find it, what I was doing, oftentimes I'll just like click it like this and just to see where it is, and then I can take a closer look and notice those changes. And then this was actually another render that I did where I aimed the light more directly at the hair over here, and then I just used that crypto thing that that I showed you that allows you to create alphas easily, and then I just used that alpha to isolate that area and level it a little bit how I wanted. Actually, I don't think I even needed to level it. I just kind of had it as is to add some of that. There's another little lost some of the shadow in the eye, so I added a little bit more back in, kind of like cleaned up that little top thing I noticed. There's some painting of hair strands. Oh, it's this tiny little thing over here. Final image. Yeah, so that's just cropping it the way that I had that one of those images. And that's it. That's pretty much the whole process. Of course, you know, I render things from other angles and show that, and I think it's really important when you show your work to try to like show how it's made as well, so that people can better appreciate the work that went into it, and potentially see like what was done how, for understanding purposes, like how far did I actually get the render versus the final image quality. Hopefully you think it's pretty close. I think it is, and I'm always trying to sort of walk the line of like, how do I do things efficiently, but also not like too much smoke and mirrors. Thanks for watching this, and take care.